Dear learners, welcome back to WSE True Stories, where English learning becomes an unforgettable adventure. Today, we invite you into the world of a man whose genius defied the boundaries of time. A painter, a scientist, an inventor, and a philosopher, he was all this and more. Not born into wealth or status, he rose from obscurity to become a symbol of the Renaissance spirit. He saw what others could not. He imagined what others dared not. And he built a bridge between art and science that still inspires the world centuries later. His name was Leonardo da Vinci. This is not just a story about art or invention. This is a journey into the mind of a man who lived with relentless curiosity and unshakable dedication to truth and beauty. A man who stood alone in many ways, misunderstood, unrecognized in his time, but who left behind a legacy so vast, the world is still catching up. Through this story, you'll improve your English, yes. But more than that, you'll be touched by the spirit of exploration, courage, and transformation. Leonardo's life will teach you that even when the world is not ready for your vision, you must still dare to dream, to question, and to create. Get ready for a story of discovery, solitude, conflict, and triumph, the story of a man who lived centuries ago but still speaks to us today. Let's start the journey into the life of Leonardo da Vinci. In the heart of 15th century Europe, a quiet revolution was stirring. It was a time when the old world was being challenged, and new ideas were just beginning to bloom. The year was 1452. In a small town called Vinci, nestled among the rolling hills of Tuscany, Italy, a child was born who would one day change the course of human thought. His name, Leonardo, simply meant brave lion, but his spirit would prove even more powerful than that name could suggest. Leonardo was born on April 15th, an illegitimate child, the son of Ser Piero, a respected Florentine notary, and a peasant woman named Caterina. His birth was not recorded with celebration or ceremony. In fact, because he was born out of wedlock, he would be denied access to formal education and many privileges of Florentine society. But fate, as always, had other plans. The young Leonardo spent his early years in Vinci, surrounded by nature. He observed the flowing streams, the fluttering birds, the curling leaves. To him, the world was not just scenery, it was a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be explored. With no access to the Latin and Greek texts studied by scholars of the time, Leonardo became his own teacher. The fields became his classroom. The skies were his scroll. The rocks, plants, and animals, his textbooks. His curiosity knew no bounds. He would sketch the way a bird lifted off the ground, or how water twisted around a rock. He questioned everything. Why did the moon follow us? How did the human eye see light? What caused the wind to change direction? These were not questions taught in school, but they consumed young Leonardo's thoughts. Despite the limitations of his social status, there was one advantage to being born outside the structure of noble life: freedom. While the sons of aristocrats were locked into rigid paths, Leonardo's path was unwritten. That freedom allowed him to wander, in thought, and in space. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear that Leonardo had a gift with his hands and eyes. He drew with such detail, such sensitivity, that even simple sketches of flowers or animals seemed to breathe on the page. His father, recognizing his son's potential, brought some of Leonardo's drawings to Florence, the cradle of Renaissance art, and showed them to a master named Andrea del Verrocchio. What happened next would change Leonardo's life forever. Verrocchio accepted Leonardo into his workshop, a prestigious studio that trained many of Florence's finest artists and engineers. For the first time, Leonardo found himself among paints and pigments, chisels and bronze, blueprints and geometry. He watched Verrocchio create not only paintings, but sculptures, machines, even theatrical devices. It was a dreamland for a mind like Leonardo's. Yet even here, surrounded by talent, Leonardo was different. While other apprentices focused only on technique, Leonardo asked deeper questions. What gives the human smile its mystery? What happens inside the body when a person moves? How does light reflect in a pool of water? He studied anatomy by dissecting animals. He experimented with perspective and shadow, seeking a realism that art had never seen before. To him, art was not merely about beauty, it was about truth. But his intense curiosity often brought him into conflict. He would leave paintings unfinished because he became fascinated with a new mechanical idea or scientific question. While Verrocchio admired Leonardo's skill, some questioned his discipline. He is brilliant, they whispered, but unreliable. Leonardo felt the weight of their judgment. Despite his immense talent, he was still the illegitimate boy from Vinci. No surname, no formal education, no powerful patrons. And worst of all, no place where his restless mind could fully belong. One of the early signs of both his genius and his inner turmoil came when Verrocchio was commissioned to paint the baptism of Christ. He assigned young Leonardo to paint one of the angels in the corner of the canvas. Leonardo's angel, soft, luminous, filled with life, was so magnificent that Verrocchio, according to legend, never painted again. He knew he had been surpassed. But instead of celebration, Leonardo was met with suspicion. Some artists mocked his eccentric ways. Scholars dismissed him as unlearned. Politicians ignored him. He had no name in the noble courts, no lineage to open doors. Leonardo began to withdraw. He filled his notebooks with designs for flying machines, observations of water flow, sketches of muscles and bones, pages and pages of brilliance that no one else ever saw. He wrote backwards, in mirror script, perhaps to keep his thoughts hidden, or simply to make sense of a world that misunderstood him. He knew he had something to offer. But he didn't know where, or how, to be heard. And then came the moment that would begin his first great journey. Florence was a city of vibrant energy, bursting with art, politics, and philosophical debate. But for Leonardo, it was starting to feel like a gilded cage. His ideas, too wide, too wild, didn't quite fit into the narrow demands of traditional commissions. He wanted to build bridges. Study the stars. Understand the human soul. So in his early 30s, Leonardo made a bold decision: he would leave Florence behind. He wrote a letter to the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. It was not a typical artist's letter. Instead of praising his paintings, Leonardo listed his skills as a military engineer. He could build catapults, design armored vehicles, create water systems, construct bridges. Almost as an afterthought, he added, "I can also paint." It was a gamble. A desperate one. But it worked. The Duke invited him to Milan. There, in a new city, far from the doubters of Florence, Leonardo hoped to begin again. He would try to build not just machines, but a new life. A place where his visions could finally take shape. Little did he know that Milan would test him like never before. The court was filled with intrigue, rivalry, and politics. Artists and engineers fought for favor. Leonardo had to prove himself, again and again, to skeptical patrons who wanted immediate results, not philosophical musings. His first major task? A massive bronze horse statue, the largest the world had ever seen, to honor the Duke's father. Leonardo threw himself into the project. He studied horses obsessively, drew hundreds of sketches, and developed new casting techniques. The model he built was so magnificent that it stunned the city. But before it could be cast in bronze, war broke out. The metal meant for the statue was repurposed into cannons. Leonardo's masterpiece, years in the making, was never completed. It was destroyed by soldiers. He was devastated. Yet he didn't give up. Instead, he turned to new projects, stage designs, water systems, anatomy studies, and, eventually, one of the most mysterious paintings in the history of art. In Milan, Leonardo began work on the Last Supper, a painting unlike anything the world had seen. But that, dear learners, was only the beginning. An even greater challenge awaited him, one that would demand not only his talent, but his soul. The convent of Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan was not a place of grandeur. The walls were plain, the architecture modest. Yet within those walls, Leonardo da Vinci set out to create something eternal. Commissioned by the Duke of Milan to paint the Last Supper, Leonardo didn't approach it like a traditional fresco. No, he wanted to break the boundaries of religious art. He saw the moment not as a holy tableau but as a storm of human emotion, betrayal, sorrow, fear, doubt, love, all captured in the instant when Jesus tells his disciples, "One of you will betray me." Instead of static figures, Leonardo painted a whirlwind of reaction. Judas clutches the silver. Peter rises in outrage. Thomas points upward, as if questioning heaven. And at the center, calm, sorrowful, radiant, sits Christ, forming a perfect triangle of light and serenity amid the chaos. But Leonardo's method was slow. Too slow. He used experimental materials instead of traditional fresco techniques, hoping to capture subtle light and shadow. He painted layer by layer, often staring at the wall for hours before applying a single brushstroke. The friars were furious. "Why is this man paid if he does not work?" they demanded. Yet Leonardo remained undeterred. He told the prior, "Sometimes the greatest work is done not with the hand, but with the mind." And he proved it. When the Last Supper was unveiled, it was as if time stopped. The silence in the refectory was profound. Even the harshest critics were silenced. The scene was alive, dramatic, spiritual, human. Word of its power spread far beyond Milan. And still, Leonardo was not satisfied. In his notebooks, he continued to dissect cadavers by candlelight, trying to understand muscles, veins, expressions. He filled pages with sketches of embryos, hearts, eyes, and even machines that could mimic the movements of the human body. He believed that to truly paint man, one must first understand man, from the inside out. But the peace did not last. The winds of war swept through Milan once again. The French invaded, and the Duke, Leonardo's patron and protector, fled into exile. The court collapsed. And with it, Leonardo's security. He was now in his late 40s. Homeless, without a patron, and carrying the weight of dozens of unfinished works and untested inventions. He wandered from city to city, Mantua, Venice, Florence, offering his services as an engineer, artist, architect. But times had changed. He was no longer young and dazzling. Rivals had risen. Michelangelo, bold, brilliant, and sharp-tongued, now ruled the Florentine art scene. they despised each other. When Leonardo was commissioned to paint a massive mural of the Battle of Anghiari in Florence's Council Hall, and Michelangelo was given the opposing wall, the rivalry turned bitter. Crowds gathered to see the two geniuses compete. But the contest ended in failure. Leonardo's experimental painting techniques caused the work to melt and decay before it was even finished. Humiliated, he abandoned the project. Behind the brilliance, the notebooks, and the fame, Leonardo wrestled with something deeper, the fear that he was misunderstood, and that his greatest visions would die with him. He once wrote, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." He felt that, despite everything, he had not done enough. He returned again to anatomy, dissecting over 30 corpses to study the human body. His drawings were decades ahead of their time, showing the heart as a muscular pump, the brain as a center of thought, the fetus curled inside the womb like a sacred mystery. But none of these works were published during his lifetime. Still, he pressed on. Always learning. Always questioning. And then came a letter from a faraway court, a place that would change the final chapter of his life. In the royal court of France, King Francis I was unlike most rulers of his time. Young, charismatic, and hungry for brilliance, Francis sought not only power but the prestige of culture and intellect. He admired Leonardo, not just as an artist, but as a symbol of the Renaissance ideal. He invited the aging master to join him in France, offering him the title premier painter, engineer, and architect to the king. Leonardo accepted. At the age of 64, he crossed the Alps once more, carrying with him 3 masterpieces, the Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. Alongside his paints and brushes, he brought trunks filled with notebooks, thousands of pages filled with drawings, ideas, questions, dreams. In France, Leonardo was treated not as a servant or laborer, but as a guest of honor. He lived in the Château du Clos-Luz, near the king's own palace. There, he finally found peace and respect. The king would often visit Leonardo, sitting with him for hours, listening to his stories, admiring his thoughts. It was a bond of deep mutual admiration. But Leonardo's body was failing. His right hand, once so precise, now trembled. His energy, once boundless, had begun to fade. He could no longer paint with the same brilliance. Instead, he dictated his thoughts, mentored young artists and engineers, and organized his studies in the hope that someday, someone would carry them forward. One day, while reflecting on his life, Leonardo turned to one of his students and said, "As a well-spent day brings happy sleep, so a life well used brings happy death." It was a moment of clarity. He had chased knowledge across every frontier, through flesh and bone, through water and wind, through light and shadow. And though the world had not always understood him, he had lived fully. Completely. Beautifully. In May 1519, Leonardo da Vinci passed away in the arms of the king, or so legend says. He was 67 years old. He left behind no children, no grand school, no finished books. But he left something far greater, a universe of thought. His notebooks, filled with mirror script and mechanical sketches, would not be widely read until centuries later. His anatomy studies would go unpublished for 400 years. His flying machines, his water pumps, his submarines, all tucked away in silence. Yet time, patient as always, did its work. Generations later, the world would come to understand the magnitude of what Leonardo had done. He had dreamed of helicopters before flight. he had drawn the heart more accurately than any of his peers. He had seen the patterns of nature, the laws of physics, the structures of biology, not as separate subjects, but as parts of one great design. And the Mona Lisa? That quiet, smiling woman with the mysterious gaze? She would become the most famous painting in the world, not just for her beauty, but for the mind behind her. The mind of a man who asked questions no one else dared to ask. Leonardo da Vinci. Not just a painter. Not just a scientist. But a universal intellect, a man who reminded us that to understand the world, we must never stop observing, questioning, and imagining. But his legacy didn't end there. For Leonardo, every answer was the beginning of a new question. And it's this relentless spirit, this refusal to stop dreaming, that would ripple through time, igniting the minds of future visionaries. But that spark would soon illuminate a world he never lived to see. A world born centuries after his death. And in the final chapters, we'll discover just how far Leonardo's light has traveled, into the heart of the modern world, and into the soul of human creativity itself. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The world changed. But Leonardo's legacy, once scattered in hidden trunks, fragmented notebooks, and half-finished sketches, began to emerge like buried treasure. Scholars, scientists, and artists rediscovered his brilliance one drawing at a time. His anatomy studies, long neglected, were found to rival modern medical diagrams. His engineering plans, designs for bridges, cranes, and even diving suits, revealed ideas far ahead of his era. His maps were so precise, some are still used as references today. And as for his artistic vision, it reshaped the foundation of how we see and portray the human soul. The name Leonardo da Vinci became more than a man. It became a symbol of genius, of insatiable curiosity, of unity between art and science. Even the word Renaissance man, used to describe someone whose talents span multiple fields, was born from his life. Because Leonardo was not a man of one identity. He was painter and sculptor, scientist and engineer, philosopher and dreamer, mathematician and musician. He was one, and he was many. And it's in the Mona Lisa, perhaps, that his true triumph whispers through the ages. She is not just a portrait. She is the embodiment of contradiction and harmony. Her gaze follows you, yet looks beyond you. Her smile is gentle, but elusive. Behind her lies a dreamlike landscape, mountains, rivers, and clouds that flow with impossible grace. For centuries, artists have studied her. Scientists have analyzed the layers of paint. Psychologists have wondered what she thinks. But maybe the answer is simple. She thinks what Leonardo thought, that the world is beautiful, mysterious, and full of questions yet to be answered. His victory was not just in what he created, but in the doors he opened for others to walk through. Generations of inventors, thinkers, and artists followed his trail. Galileo looked at the stars with wonder like Leonardo did. Newton asked why apples fall and built laws to explain it. Einstein once said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge." Had he lived in the Renaissance, he might have walked beside Leonardo himself. But Leonardo's greatest achievement may be something more personal, something within us all. He proved that you don't have to choose. That art and science, heart and mind, reason and emotion, these are not opposites, but partners in understanding the world. He showed us that curiosity is a kind of courage. That it's noble to ask why, and even nobler to spend a lifetime chasing the answer. And he did this despite never fitting in. Despite being born illegitimate, denied a classical education, mocked for his unconventional ways. He showed that greatness doesn't require approval, only persistence and purpose. In a time when most men sought power or fame, Leonardo sought truth. And that is rare. So what is the legacy of Leonardo da Vinci? It's more than paintings. More than machines. More than notebooks filled with mirror writing and flying inventions. His legacy is a way of thinking. It's in every child who takes apart a clock to see how it works. In every artist who studies muscle and bone to draw the human form. In every scientist who looks beyond what is, to dream of what could be. It's in every person who asks, what if? Leonardo taught us that curiosity is not a luxury, it's a necessity. That true knowledge does not come from repeating what others say, but from observing, questioning, experimenting. He once wrote, "Learning never exhausts the mind." And in those 5 words, he gave us a road map, not just to knowledge, but to joy. Because for Leonardo, learning was not a burden. It was a kind of love. A reverence for the world's complexity, its patterns, its secrets. He also taught us patience. Many of his works were never finished. Some were ruined. Some were laughed at. But he never stopped trying. He never stopped creating. Because for him, the journey was the purpose. The process was the masterpiece. There is a profound humility in that. And there's another lesson too, a quieter one. Leonardo reminds us to see the connections between things. The flutter of a bird's wing and the motion of water. The curve of a smile and the architecture of a bridge. The heartbeat and the ticking of a machine. In a world that often separates disciplines, Leonardo stitched them together. He didn't just blur the lines, he erased them. That's what makes him eternal. Because in every age, in every country, in every language, we are all trying to understand how the world works, and how we fit into it. Leonardo was simply the first to map that journey with such grace. And though he died more than 500 years ago, we still walk in his footsteps. Dear learners, as we come to the end of this remarkable journey, take a deep breath and reflect. This wasn't just the story of a genius. It was the story of a man who dared to dream beyond the boundaries of his time. A man who was not content to be one thing, or follow one path. A man who stood at the crossroads of art and science, and built a bridge with his own hands. Leonardo da Vinci reminds us that it's never too late to ask why, and never too soon to follow that question wherever it leads. He invites us to observe more deeply, to learn more patiently, to love more fully, not only the world around us, but the universe within. And in that spirit, let his story stay with you. When you next pick up a pencil, let your hand remember his sketches. When you look up at the sky, let your thoughts echo his dreams of flying. When you struggle to finish something, remember his notebooks, half-finished, chaotic, but brilliant all the same. You are allowed to wonder. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to be more than one thing. Carry forward Leonardo's message, be curious. Be bold. Be timeless. If his journey moved you, share it. Not just the story, but the spirit. Inspire someone else to learn, to create, to dream. And if you haven't yet, remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment, not just for us, but for the world. What part of Leonardo's story spoke to you most? How will you bring his spirit into your own life? Until next time, keep learning, keep dreaming, and keep asking questions. Goodbye for now, and remember, the world belongs to the curious.